Last month, 50 million American families struggled to pay for gasoline while crude oil prices soared to their highest levels in 3 years. The same month, Saudi Aramco posted record quarterly profits of $44 billion from oil sales to those same struggling families. Coincidence? But on March 8, 2020, something happened that revealed the real story behind every spike in gas prices. Oil prices crashed 25% in a single day after Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman launched what he called an oil price war against Russia. Markets panicked. Energy stocks collapsed. The question everyone asked: how did we get here? 2 years later, we have our answer, and it's worse than anyone imagined. Because while the world believed this was about a dispute with Russia, leaked documents from inside the Saudi royal court revealed a coordinated strategy to manipulate global energy markets for maximum profit extraction. After March 2020, the Saudis didn't slow down their market manipulation, they accelerated it. They flooded global markets with cheap oil, destroying American energy companies, then cut production to drive prices through the roof. All while ordinary families paid the price at every gas station in America. And the man controlling it all? A 37-year-old crown prince who personally owns a $500 billion sovereign wealth fund, 3 super yachts, and the most expensive house ever purchased. Mohammed bin Salman, the puppet master behind a global energy empire that has quietly become more dangerous than any government on earth. They've just begun flexing their power. Chapter 1. The crash. The call came at 3:47 a.m. Riyadh time on March 7, 2020. Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS to his inner circle, sat in his private office on the 99th floor of the Kingdom Center in Riyadh. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the sprawling capital of Saudi Arabia stretched out beneath him like a chessboard. On the other end of the line, Russian President Vladimir Putin's energy minister, Alexander Novak. For months, OPEC plus the cartel that controls nearly 40% of the world's oil production had maintained production cuts designed to keep prices stable. Saudi Arabia and Russia, the 2 largest producers in the group, had worked together to manage global supply, but that cooperation was about to end. MBS listened as Novak delivered Moscow's message. Russia would not agree to deeper production cuts to offset the economic impact of the spreading COVID-19 pandemic. Russian oil companies needed cash flow. They would not sacrifice market share to prop up prices. The Crown Prince's response was immediate and calculated. Fine, MBS told his advisors after hanging up. If Russia wants a market share war, we'll give them one. But we won't just compete, we'll destroy them. What happened next sent shockwaves through global energy markets that are still being felt today. Within hours of that phone call, Saudi Aramco, the world's most profitable company and the crown jewel of the Saudi economy, received direct orders from the royal palace. The message was simple but devastating: flood the market. On March 8, 2020, Saudi Arabia announced it would increase oil production to a record 12.3 million barrels per day, while simultaneously slashing prices by up to $8 per barrel. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Brent crude oil, the global benchmark, crashed from $45 per barrel to $34 in a single trading session, a 25% collapse that wiped out nearly $500 billion in global energy investments in one day. Why? American shale oil companies, which needed prices above $40 per barrel to remain profitable, saw their stock prices cut in half. Energy workers from Texas to North Dakota received termination notices. Independent gas stations across America faced bankruptcy as their wholesale costs plummeted while contracted supply agreements locked them into higher prices. But in Riyadh, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was just getting started. What the world didn't know was that the oil price war with Russia was never really about Russia at all. It was the opening move in the most ambitious market manipulation scheme in modern history, a plan that would reshape global energy markets, destroy American energy independence, and transfer hundreds of billions of dollars from ordinary consumers to Saudi royal bank accounts. The architect of this strategy wasn't some veteran oil executive or seasoned diplomat. It was a millennial prince who had never worked a day outside the royal court but understood power in ways that would make Machiavelli proud. This is the story of how Mohammed bin Salman weaponized the world's most essential commodity against the global economy, how Saudi Aramco became the instrument of that destruction, and how a secret network of royal insiders, international bankers, and complicit governments helped orchestrate the greatest wealth transfer in human history. Most importantly, it's the story of what's coming next, because the 2020 oil crash was just the beginning. The first domino had fallen. Oil prices were in free fall. American energy companies faced extinction. But to understand how one phone call could trigger a global economic crisis, we need to understand the man who made that call and the empire he was born to inherit. Chapter 2 of Desert Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud was born into absolute power on August 31, 1985. His father, Salman bin Abdulaziz, was already a senior prince in the Saudi royal family, a clan of over 7,000 members who collectively control the world's largest oil reserves. His mother, Fatima bint Fala al-Hithalain, came from the powerful Ajman tribe, cementing young Mohammed's position in the complex web of desert politics that governs the kingdom. They lived in a palace compound covering 12 acres in the heart of Riyadh. On most days, servants attended to every need while armed guards ensured the family's security from the growing unrest brewing across the Middle East. Prince Salman believed in the traditional path for Saudi royalty: education abroad, ceremonial government positions, and a comfortable life managing the family's vast business interests. For Prince Salman, the oil business was a blessing that required careful stewardship. It provided stability and ensured the Al Saud family's continued reign over the kingdom. It was honest work, in the sense that it maintained the status quo that had enriched the family for over 8 decades. But young Mohammed watched and wondered, why stop there? Why simply manage the oil wealth when you could weaponize it? Why be content with billions when you could control trillions? At age 10, Mohammed's worldview was shaped by a single, defining moment that would echo through the rest of his life. In 1995, King Fahd, Mohammed's great-uncle and the reigning monarch, suffered a stroke that left him partially incapacitated for months. The royal court was paralyzed with indecision about who would make crucial decisions affecting the kingdom's oil policy. Young Mohammed watched as various princes jockeyed for position, each claiming to speak for the incapacitated king. Oil prices fluctuated wildly during this period of uncertainty, and Mohammed observed something crucial: the mere perception of instability in Saudi leadership could move global markets by billions of dollars overnight. While his tutors taught him about Islamic history and Arabic literature, Mohammed was learning a far more valuable lesson about power. Oil wasn't just a commodity, it was a weapon. And information about Saudi oil policy was perhaps the most valuable intelligence on earth. When Mohammed brought his observations about market manipulation to his father, Prince Salman wouldn't hear it. Mohammed tried explaining how they could use the family's oil position more strategically, but his father couldn't wrap his mind around Mohammed's ambitious vision of market domination. Mohammed wasn't built for maintaining the status quo. He wanted to build a financial empire that would make the Saudi royal family the most powerful dynasty in human history, and he was ready to fight economic wars to get there. This childhood experience taught Mohammed that traditional royal approaches to power were fundamentally limited, while other princes focused on ceremonial roles and passive wealth management. He would master the art of market manipulation on a global scale. The lesson was clear: information about Saudi oil policy was more valuable than the oil itself. And if you controlled that information, if you could create uncertainty, manage expectations, and time market moving announcements, you could generate more wealth than simply pumping crude oil. From the desert, Mohammed began studying how markets reacted to Saudi statements about production, exports, and pricing. He noticed that even minor comments from senior royals could move oil futures by several dollars per barrel. A casual remark about production capacity could trigger billions in trading volume within minutes. But the real education came from watching international reactions to Saudi policy changes. When Crown Prince Abdullah announced modest production increases in 1997, American politicians praised Saudi Arabia as a reliable energy partner. When production cuts were announced in 1998, those same politicians condemned Saudi manipulation of global markets. Mohammed realized that Western governments wanted Saudi oil production to serve American economic interests stable, predictable, and cheap. This was Mohammed's first lesson in geopolitical power. The country that controlled oil prices controlled the global economy, and the person who controlled Saudi oil policy controlled the most powerful economic weapon in human history. By age 15, Mohammed had developed what would become his core philosophy. Power wasn't about managing resources, it was about weaponizing them. Oil wasn't a business, it was a tool of statecraft. And market manipulation wasn't cheating, it was strategy. His father saw oil as a source of wealth to be carefully managed for long-term stability. Mohammed saw it as a means of achieving absolute power over global financial markets. The difference between these worldviews would eventually reshape the entire global economy. But teenage ambition meant nothing without access to real power. Mohammed needed to infiltrate the networks that actually controlled international finance and energy policy. He needed elite education, powerful mentors, and most importantly, he needed to prove himself worthy of inheriting the Saudi oil empire. That education would begin in the most exclusive and ruthless environment imaginable, the Saudi royal court itself. Chapter 3: Elite Networks. Mohammed doesn't settle for traditional Saudi education. His goal: the most elite business education money can buy. Most Saudi princes attended universities in Europe or established American institutions like Georgetown. Mohammed chose a more unconventional approach. He would study domestically at King Saud University, while simultaneously building relationships with the world's most powerful financial institutions through private consulting arrangements. The barrier was that no major international bank had ever offered a formal education program for foreign royalty. Mohammed's solution was typically audacious. He personally called the CEO of Goldman Sachs and proposed a strategic partnership that would provide him with direct access to the firm's energy trading desk in exchange for exclusive insights into Saudi oil policy. Goldman Sachs agreed to the arrangement in 2003. When Mohammed was just 18 years old, the precedent had been set. The future of Saudi Arabia was willing to trade state secrets for a financial education. Mohammed had made it to the most exclusive financial network in the world, but he wasn't about to blend into the crowd. Goldman Sachs in the 2000s operated under strict protocols about client information and trading strategies. Internal communications were monitored, trading positions were documented, and regulatory compliance was paramount. Most client relationships followed established patterns. Institutional investors received research reports. Sovereign wealth funds executed large-scale transactions through established channels, and information sharing followed carefully negotiated protocols. Mohammed saw an opportunity in these restrictive protocols. He started what he called strategic dialogues, informal discussions with Goldman energy analysts where he would share general thoughts about Saudi production capacity, while asking detailed questions about how international markets interpreted various Saudi policy signals. These conversations weren't technically trading advice or market manipulation, they were educational exchanges. But the practical effect was that Mohammed gained intimate knowledge of how global oil markets actually functioned, while Goldman gained unprecedented insight into Saudi decision-making processes. When Goldman's compliance department raised concerns about these unusual arrangements, Mohammed escalated the matter directly to senior partners. The message was clear: these relationships weren't just profitable, they were strategically essential for the firm's energy business. The conversations continued and expanded. Mohammed becomes popular among Goldman's energy team, then among their broader institutional client base. So successful at building relationships that he even gets invited into exclusive gatherings of energy ministers, sovereign wealth fund managers, and central bank officials. These networks included some of the most influential figures in global finance: Henry Paulson, who would later become U.S. Treasury Secretary, learned to trust Mohammed's insights about Saudi policy intentions. Nouriel Roubini, the economist who predicted the 2008 financial crisis, regularly consulted with Mohammed about oil market dynamics. Jamie Dimon, CEO of Morgan Chase, developed a direct communication channel with Mohammed for crisis management scenarios. Through these connections, Mohammed gained access to information that even senior Saudi government officials didn't possess. He learned how American energy companies finance shale drilling operations, how European governments manage strategic oil reserves, and how Asian economies hedged against oil price volatility. More importantly, he learned how to weaponize information asymmetries. By 2010, Mohammed had developed relationships with energy officials from over 40 countries. Each relationship provided him with unique insights into how different economies would respond to various oil market scenarios. He could predict which countries would panic during supply disruptions, which governments would intervene during price spikes, and which financial institutions would be most vulnerable to energy market volatility. This intelligence network would prove invaluable when Mohammed inherited real power within the Saudi government. In 2015, Mohammed graduated from King Saud University with a degree in law, a ceremonial achievement that mattered far less than the informal education he had received through his international financial networks, armed with elite connections and intimate knowledge of global energy markets. Mohammed was finally ready for his dream, controlling the world's most powerful economic weapon. All roads led to Saudi Aramco, the state oil company that produced more oil than the next 5 largest producers combined. And Mohammed was ready to transform it from a traditional energy company into an instrument of economic warfare, or at least he thought Saudi Aramco was ready for him. But if Mohammed thought controlling the world's largest oil company was going to be straightforward, he was wrong. Because the entrenched interests surrounding Aramco were more powerful and more protective than anything he had encountered in his privileged life. Chapter 4: Royal Ascension. Armed with his international connections and deep understanding of global energy markets, Mohammed enters Saudi government service with characteristic confidence. His first appointment comes in 2009 when his father, Prince Salman, becomes governor of Riyadh province and names Mohammed as a special advisor on economic development. The position pays $200,000 annually, modest by royal standards, but Mohammed doesn't just accept it. He wants more responsibility. His reasoning is simple but telling: Saudi Arabia needed to diversify beyond oil dependency, and that transformation required someone who understood both traditional Saudi power structures and modern global finance. The royal court agrees, promoting him to deputy crown prince in 2013. First victory achieved, but Mohammed has bigger ambitions than ceremonial government positions can satisfy. He wants direct control over Saudi Aramco and the kingdom's sovereign wealth funds. As soon as he gains influence over energy policy, his approach is revolutionary and controversial. The first major test comes in 2014, when global oil prices begin declining due to increased American shale production. Traditional Saudi policy would be to cut production to support prices, maintaining market stability, while preserving long-term relationships with international partners. Mohammed advocates for the opposite strategy: increase production, flood global markets, and destroy American shale producers through sustained low prices. His presentation to the Royal Council is methodical and ruthless. The Americans think their technology revolution has broken our power over energy markets. They believe shale oil has made them energy independent. They are wrong. American shale companies require oil prices above $40 per barrel to remain profitable. Saudi production costs are under $10 per barrel. We can sustain low prices longer than they can sustain losses. The plan encounters immediate resistance from senior princes who worry about damaging relationships with the United States and sacrificing short-term oil revenues for uncertain strategic gains. Mohammed's response reveals the calculating mind that would later reshape global energy markets. We can lose money for 2 years and destroy American energy independence forever. Or we can maintain prices and watch America become a permanent competitor. The choice is obvious. But the real turning point comes during a crucial meeting in late 2014. Then Crown Prince Ukraine, Mohammed's rival for succession, publicly opposes the aggressive pricing strategy during a meeting with foreign oil ministers. Ukraine argues that sustained low prices would destabilize the Saudi economy and damage relationships with OPEC partners. Mohammed's internal reaction is swift and decisive. Instead of arguing policy details, He begins building a coalition among younger royals and technocratic government officials who share his vision of Saudi Arabia as an aggressive global power rather than a cautious regional player. Through careful political maneuvering, Mohammed convinces his father, King Salman, that the kingdom needs more decisive leadership on energy policy. The older generation's cautious approach to oil management was inadequate for responding to American energy challenges and regional security threats. In April 2015, King Salman removes Mukran from the line of succession and names Mohammed as Crown Prince the heir apparent to the Saudi throne and de facto controller of the kingdom's energy policy. Mohammed had achieved what seemed impossible just years earlier: direct control over the world's largest oil company and most influential sovereign wealth fund. Any friend in the Saudi royal court is valuable. But Mohammed's rise to power creates something far more dangerous: the combination of millennial ambition with absolute power over global energy markets. The new crown prince immediately begins implementing his vision for Saudi energy dominance, but his first major test won't be political, it will be financial. In 2016, Mohammed announces plans for the largest initial public offering in history, selling 5% of Saudi Aramco to international investors, with a target valuation of $2 trillion. The IPO would serve multiple strategic purposes, raising hundreds of billions for the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, forcing international disclosure of Aramco's actual production capabilities, and creating financial incentives for global investors to support Saudi energy policy. But the IPO also reveals something crucial about Mohammed's long-term strategy. He wasn't just selling shares in an oil company, he was creating financial dependencies that would make the global economy complicit in Saudi market manipulation. Hours after the IPO announcement, Mohammed receives a call he's been expecting but dreading. The caller identifies himself as a senior official from the U.S. Treasury Department, though Mohammed suspects he's actually CIA. The man's message is diplomatic but clear: American officials are concerned about the strategic implications of opening Saudi Aramco to international investment, particularly given the Crown Prince's aggressive approach to energy policy. The official suggests that perhaps a smaller offering, or a longer preparation period, might be more appropriate for such a significant transaction. Mohammed's response sets the tone for everything that follows. With respect, this is a Saudi decision about Saudi assets. International investors will decide whether our offering meets their standards. We're confident it will. Then Mohammed delivers the line that marks his transformation from privileged prince to global power broker. American energy independence depends on American companies remaining profitable. We look forward to seeing how long they can maintain their current production levels. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Mohammed was announcing that Saudi Arabia would no longer coordinate its energy policy with American economic interests. The kingdom would pursue its own strategic objectives regardless of the impact on global markets or American consumers. But if Mohammed thought international markets were going to embrace his vision of Saudi energy dominance, he was wrong, because his IPO strategy was about to collide with the most complex and dangerous geopolitical crisis in decades. Chapter 5: Aramco's Empire. To understand why Mohammed's IPO threat sent shockwaves through international markets, you need to understand what Saudi Aramco actually is and why it represents the most concentrated economic power in human history. Saudi Aramco isn't just the world's most profitable company. The world's most profitable company by a margin so vast that it defies comprehension. In 2018, the year before Mohammed began planning the IPO, Aramco generated $356 billion in revenue. To put that in perspective, that's more than the GDP of most countries. It's more than the combined revenues of Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. It's equivalent to the entire annual economic output of Israel or Ireland. But revenue numbers don't capture Aramco's true power. The company's real weapon is its unmatched production capacity and unparalleled production costs. Aramco can produce 12 million barrels of oil per day, roughly 12% of global consumption. That single company can supply the entire oil needs of the United States, China, Japan, and India combined. No other oil producer comes close to that capacity. More importantly, Aramco can increase production to 15 million barrels per day within 90 days and sustain that level indefinitely. This surge capacity means Saudi Arabia can single-handedly determine global oil prices by adjusting production levels, but the real strategic advantage lies in production costs. Saudi oil fields are geological miracles, vast underground reservoirs of light, sweet crude oil. The highest quality petroleum lie just beneath the surface. Most Saudi oil wells require minimal processing and can produce for decades without significant maintenance. The result, Saudi Arabia can profitably produce oil at under $10 per barrel while maintaining industry-leading profit margins. Compare that to American shale production, which requires $40 to $60 per barrel to break even, or Canadian tar sands, which need $80 to $100 per barrel for profitability. Russian Arctic production requires prices above $50 per barrel just to cover extraction costs. This cost advantage means Saudi Arabia can manipulate global prices with impunity. If oil prices rise too high, the kingdom can flood markets with cheap production. If prices fall too low, Saudi Arabia can cut production and force prices higher while competitors go bankrupt. No other country or company possesses this level of market control. Mohammed understood that Aramco's unique position made it more than an oil company. It was a weapon of economic warfare that could destabilize entire countries or industries within months. But Mohammed sees something even more valuable when he looks at Aramco's potential: the company's proven reserves. Aramco controls approximately 260 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, roughly 15% of all oil remaining on Earth, at current consumption rates. That represents over 70 years of production at maximum capacity. These reserves are conservatively valued at $15 trillion at current oil prices, but if oil prices were to double, which could happen during any major supply disruption, those reserves would be worth $30 trillion. To understand that scale, $30 trillion is larger than the combined GDP of the United States and China. It's larger than the total market capitalization of every stock exchange on Earth combined. Mohammed realized that Aramco wasn't just controlling current oil markets, it was controlling the future of global energy for the next century. Here's exactly how Mohammed planned to weaponize this power. Step 1. Market intelligence. Through the planned IPO process, Aramco would gain access to the most sophisticated financial intelligence networks on Earth. Investment banks conducting due diligence would provide detailed analysis of competitors' financial vulnerabilities. Institutional investors would share their hedging strategies and risk management approaches. Government pension funds would reveal their long-term energy investment strategies. All of this information would flow directly to Mohammed and his inner circle, providing unprecedented insight into how global markets would respond to various Saudi actions. Step 2. Financial leverage. Once Aramco shares traded on international exchanges, major pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and institutional investors would become financially dependent on Aramco's profitability. Any action that harmed Aramco would directly damage these investors' portfolios. This created a powerful incentive for international financial institutions to support Saudi energy policy regardless of its impact on consumers or competitor companies. Step 3. Regulatory capture. As a publicly traded company, Aramco would gain access to the same regulatory protections and legal frameworks that protected other international corporations. Environmental regulations, antitrust enforcement, and trade restrictions would become more difficult to apply to Saudi operations. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia would gain new tools to retaliate against unfavorable policies through selective investment decisions and market timing. Step 4. Information warfare. Public company status would require Aramco to publish detailed financial reports, production data, and strategic analyses. But it would also allow the company to control the narrative around its operations through investor relations, media management, and selective disclosure of market-moving information. Mohammed could time announcements about production capacity, new field discoveries, or technological innovations to maximum market impact. Between 2016 and 2019, Mohammed used the IPO preparation process to extract over $200 billion from international investors through bond sales, direct investments, and joint venture agreements. Saudi Arabia gained access to the most sophisticated financial and technological networks on Earth, while international partners became increasingly dependent on Saudi cooperation. But the real genius of Mohammed's strategy was how it transformed international opposition to Saudi policies into financial self-harm. When human rights organizations criticized Saudi actions in Yemen, they were effectively advocating for policies that would damage their own pension funds, investments in Saudi bonds, and energy projects. When environmental groups opposed fossil fuel development, they were attacking assets owned by teachers' retirement funds and university endowments. Mohammed had successfully made the global economy complicit in Saudi market manipulation, but if Mohammed thought his financial engineering would insulate him from international pressure, he was wrong, because his strategy was about to collide with the most dangerous geopolitical rivalry of the 21st century, the growing economic war between the United States and China. And that collision would provide Mohammed with an opportunity to demonstrate just how devastating his economic weapons could be. Chapter 6: Hidden Mechanisms. What happened in March 2020 wasn't a spontaneous reaction to a disagreement with Russia. It was the culmination of a 3-year strategy designed to reshape global energy markets and establish Saudi Arabia as the dominant economic power in a multipolar world. The strategy had a code name within Mohammed's inner circle: Operation Desert Storm 2.0, reference to the 1991 Gulf War. But this time the battlefield was financial markets rather than physical territory. Here's exactly how Mohammed executed the most sophisticated market manipulation scheme in modern history. Phase 1: Intelligence Gathering 2017 to 2019 through Aramco's IPO preparation process. Saudi intelligence services gained unprecedented access to American energy companies' financial data, production capabilities, and strategic planning. Investment banks conducting due diligence on Aramco shared detailed competitive analyses that revealed the exact break-even costs for every major American shale producer. Private equity firms provided confidential assessments of their energy portfolio companies' debt burdens and operational vulnerabilities. Government regulators shared environmental impact studies that revealed which American production facilities could be shuttered quickly during a price war. This information allowed Mohammed's team to create detailed models of how American energy markets would respond to sustained low oil prices. They knew exactly which companies would fail first, which regions would experience the highest unemployment, and which political constituencies would pressure American politicians for emergency support. But the most valuable intelligence came from an unexpected source: Chinese energy companies seeking to expand their operations in the Middle East. Beginning in 2018, Chinese state-owned oil companies approached Saudi officials about joint development projects in Saudi Arabia and potential investments in Aramco itself. These discussions provided Mohammed with detailed information about Chinese energy import requirements, strategic reserve policies, and long-term economic planning. Mohammed realized that China represented an alternative market for Saudi oil exports, one that was growing rapidly and had strategic interests that often conflicted with American policy objectives. Phase 2: Alliance Building 2019-2020. While publicly maintaining the U.S.-Saudi strategic partnership, Mohammed quietly developed parallel relationships with Chinese officials, Russian energy companies, and European governments concerned about American energy dominance. The key breakthrough came in late 2019 when Mohammed negotiated what he called insurance policies with each major power bloc. With China, long-term supply contracts that would guarantee Chinese energy security in exchange for Chinese support during any future oil market crisis. If Saudi Arabia faced international pressure over oil policies, China would increase purchases to offset any boycotts or sanctions. With Russia, a coordination mechanism that would allow both countries to manipulate oil markets without direct cooperation. Russia would maintain its OPEC Plus commitments until Saudi Arabia provided 48 hours notice of any major policy changes, then both countries would pursue their individual interests without formal coordination, providing legal protection against cartel allegations. With Europe, technical cooperation agreements that positioned Saudi Arabia as a reliable alternative to Russian energy supplies if geopolitical tensions ever disrupted Russian energy exports. European countries would have pre-negotiated access to increased Saudi production. These arrangements meant Mohammed could trigger oil market crisis while maintaining plausible deniability and alternative markets for Saudi exports. Phase 3, market positioning late 2019. In the months leading up to the March 2020 crisis, Saudi Arabia quietly adjusted its production, export, and financial positions to maximize the impact of a potential oil price war. The kingdom built up its foreign currency reserves to over $500 billion, enough to sustain government operations for several years even with minimal oil revenues. Saudi Aramco accelerated debt payoffs and reduced operational expenses to minimize the company's vulnerability to sustained low prices. Meanwhile, Mohammed's sovereign wealth fund began taking short positions against American energy companies and long positions in assets that would benefit from oil market volatility, including gold, bonds, and Chinese technology companies. When the March 2020 crisis began, Saudi Arabia was positioned to profit from the chaos while its competitors faced bankruptcy. Phase 4, information warfare. March 2020. The March 8 production announcement wasn't just about flooding oil markets, it was about creating maximum psychological impact. Through carefully orchestrated communications, Mohammed personally called major oil trading firms to explain Saudi policy, providing them with information that was designed to trigger panic selling. He told Goldman Sachs that Saudi Arabia was prepared to sustain production at maximum levels for as long as necessary to maintain market share. He informed Morgan that the kingdom had identified new production capacity that could add another 2 million barrels per day to global supply. These conversations were technically private communications between business partners. But Mohammed knew that the information would immediately flow to trading desks and trigger algorithmic selling programs. Simultaneously, Saudi officials provided selective information to financial media outlets. Reuters received exclusive details about Aramco's production capabilities. Bloomberg got inside sources confirming Saudi determination to win the price war. The Wall Street Journal published leaked internal documents showing Saudi confidence in their ability to outlast competitors. Each story was carefully designed to reinforce the narrative that oil prices would remain low indefinitely, encouraging additional panic selling and short-term speculation that amplified the market crash. Phase 5, systematic destruction. March-April 2020. With oil prices collapsing and American energy companies facing bankruptcy, Mohammed implemented the most devastating phase of his strategy: selective market manipulation. Designed to accelerate American industry consolidation while preserving Saudi market advantages. The mechanism was ingenious in its simplicity. Saudi Arabia would announce temporary production cuts whenever oil prices fell below levels that would trigger systemic financial crisis, preventing total market collapse while maintaining enough pressure to force weaker American companies into bankruptcy. But these production adjustments were announced with carefully designed timing and duration to maximize damage to specific competitors. When Chesapeake Energy, one of America's largest shale producers, faced a crucial debt refinancing deadline in April 2020, Saudi Arabia announced a temporary 2 million barrel per day production cut that drove oil prices up just enough to encourage Chesapeake's creditors to extend the refinancing deadline. Then, 48 hours after Chesapeake's deadline passed, Saudi Arabia quietly rescinded the production cut, causing oil prices to crash again and forcing Chesapeake into bankruptcy. This pattern repeated with dozens of American energy companies. Each time a major producer faced a financial deadline or attempted to raise emergency capital, Saudi Arabia would manipulate production announcements to maximize the financial pressure at the worst possible moment. The result was systematic elimination of American energy independence through precisely timed market manipulation that was technically legal but strategically devastating. Phase 6, Wealth Transfer. May 2020 present. By summer 2020, Mohammed had achieved his primary strategic objectives. Dozens of American energy companies had declared bankruptcy or been acquired by larger competitors at distressed prices. American oil production had fallen by over 2 million barrels per day. The U.S. had returned to importing significant quantities of oil for the first time since 2010, but the real victory was financial rather than strategic. During the oil price collapse, Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund had systematically purchased distressed energy assets, technology companies, and financial instruments at panic-induced discounts. When oil prices eventually recovered, these investments generated hundreds of billions in profits that were directly transferred from American pension funds, insurance companies, and individual investors to Saudi royal accounts. Meanwhile, the systematic destruction of American energy companies eliminated competition for Saudi exports while creating permanent demand for Saudi oil from American refineries that no longer had reliable domestic supplies. Mohammed had successfully used market manipulation to transfer wealth from American consumers to Saudi royalty while establishing permanent Saudi control over global energy markets. But the March 2020 oil crisis was just a demonstration of Saudi capabilities. The real test of Mohammed's economic weapons was still to come. Chapter 7: Human Impact. Sarah Martinez found this out the hard way. For 15 years, Sarah had worked as a financial analyst for Continental Resources, one of America's most successful shale oil companies, based in Oklahoma City. Continental had pioneered horizontal drilling techniques that unlocked massive oil reserves across North Dakota and Texas. Sarah's job was analyzing drilling projects and helping Continental's executives decide which oil fields to develop. Her work directly supported over 8,000 jobs across the American energy sector, from drilling crews to pipeline workers to refinery operators. In 2019, Sarah earned $85,000 annually, enough to support her family, pay down student loans, and save for her children's college education. Continental's stock price had tripled since 2016, making her employee stock options worth over $150,000. She was planning to use those savings as a down payment on a larger house in a better school district. Sarah's life represented the American dream that energy independence was supposed to protect: stable employment, rising wages, and growing wealth for middle-class families. When Mohammed began implementing his oil market strategy, Sarah watched Continental's financial position deteriorate with growing anxiety. In March 2020, when Saudi Arabia announced its production increase and oil prices collapsed, Sarah experienced the devastating reality of economic warfare directed against ordinary American workers. Continental's stock price fell 75% in 2 weeks. The value of Sarah's employee stock options evaporated overnight, wiping out her family's savings and forcing them to abandon their plans for a new home. Then came the layoffs. Continental announced it was suspending drilling operations across 40% of its production facilities and eliminating 3,200 jobs, nearly 40% of its workforce. Sarah received her termination notice on April 15, 2020, via email at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The email was brief and bureaucratic. Due to unprecedented market conditions affecting the energy sector, Continental Resources is implementing workforce reductions across all operational divisions. Your position has been eliminated effective immediately. Sarah's family health insurance was terminated 30 days later. Her unemployment benefits provided $400 per week, less than half her previous income, for a maximum of 26 weeks. After that, her family would have no financial support while she searched for work in an industry that had lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. But Sarah's personal crisis was part of a much larger pattern of destruction across American energy communities. In North Dakota, unemployment in energy-dependent counties rose from 3% to 18% between March and June 2020. Towns that had experienced unprecedented growth during the shale boom faced sudden population decline as workers fled to find employment in other states. Williston, North Dakota, the epicenter of the American shale revolution, saw property values decline by 35% in 6 months as energy workers defaulted on mortgages and abandoned homes they could no longer afford. Local businesses that had served energy workers faced their own crises. Restaurants, retail stores, and service companies that had invested heavily in expanding their operations during the energy boom now faced bankruptcy as their customer base disappeared. Mike Thompson, who owned an equipment rental company in Williston, experienced the ripple effects of Mohammed's strategy firsthand. For 8 years, Mike's business had grown steadily by renting heavy machinery to drilling crews and pipeline construction companies. He employed 45 local residents and had expanded his fleet to over 200 pieces of equipment. When the oil price war eliminated drilling activity, Mike's revenue fell by 90% within 2 months. He was forced to lay off 40 employees, sell most of his equipment at distressed prices, and ultimately declare bankruptcy in August 2020. "I built this business over 15 years," Mike said in an interview with local media. "I employed local people, paid local taxes, and supported this community. Now it's all gone because some prince in Saudi Arabia decided to flood the oil market. How is that fair to American workers?" But the human cost extended far beyond individual job losses and business failures. Energy-dependent communities across Texas, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and North Dakota had built their public budgets around tax revenues from oil and gas production. When energy companies stopped drilling and pumping, local governments faced severe budget shortfalls that forced cuts to education, emergency services, and infrastructure maintenance. In West Texas, the Permian Basin, America's most productive oil region, experienced systematic deterioration of public services as energy tax revenues collapsed. School districts eliminated art and music programs, increased class sizes, and deferred maintenance on aging facilities. Fire departments reduced staffing and emergency response capabilities. Police departments canceled training programs and delayed equipment upgrades. The city of Midland, Texas, which had invested heavily in infrastructure improvements during the shale boom, was forced to issue emergency bonds to maintain basic municipal services. Property taxes increased 25% in 2021 to compensate for lost energy revenues, placing additional financial pressure on residents who were already struggling with unemployment and declining home values. Meanwhile, healthcare systems in energy communities faced unprecedented challenges as unemployed workers lost health insurance while stress-related medical problems increased throughout the region. Dr. Jennifer Rodriguez, who worked at a community health center in North Dakota, documented the psychological and physical toll of the economic crisis on energy workers and their families. "We saw dramatic increases in anxiety, depression, and substance abuse among people who had never experienced mental health problems," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "These were people who had good jobs, stable families, and bright futures. Suddenly they faced unemployment, foreclosure, and uncertainty about their children's education and health care." Domestic violence incidents increased 40% in energy-dependent counties during 2020, according to law enforcement statistics. Divorce rates spiked as financial pressure destroyed marriages. Suicide rates among middle-aged men, the demographic most affected by energy job losses, increased to levels not seen since the Great Depression. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of the human cost was its preventability. The oil price war wasn't caused by natural market forces or uncontrollable economic factors. It was deliberately engineered by Mohammed and his advisors to transfer wealth from American workers to Saudi royalty while eliminating competition for Saudi oil exports. Sarah Martinez, Mike Thompson, Dr. Rodriguez, and millions of other Americans suffered economic devastation not because of recession, technological change, or global competition, but because a foreign government decided to weaponize oil markets against American prosperity. The scale of this wealth transfer was staggering and unprecedented. Between March 2020 and December 2022, American energy workers lost an estimated $280 billion in wages due to unemployment and reduced oil industry activity. American energy companies lost over $500 billion in market value, much of which was eventually recovered by foreign investors who purchased distressed assets at panic-induced prices. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund generated over $150 billion in profits from investments made during the oil market crisis. Mohammed personally accumulated an estimated $50 billion in additional wealth through strategic positions in distressed American assets. The mathematical reality was stark. Hundreds of billions of dollars were transferred from American workers' families and communities directly to Saudi royal accounts through systematic market manipulation. But this massive wealth transfer was just the beginning of Mohammed's economic strategy. The destruction of American energy independence eliminated the United States' ability to influence global oil prices through domestic production. America returned to dependence on foreign oil imports for the first time in over a decade, creating permanent vulnerability to future Saudi market manipulation. And Mohammed was already planning the next phase of his economic warfare campaign, one that would dwarf the 2020 oil crisis in its scope and devastation. The destruction wasn't limited to individual workers like Sarah Martinez and business owners like Mike Thompson. The systematic dismantling of American energy independence created cascading effects that devastated entire communities, destroyed generational wealth, and fundamentally altered the life trajectories of millions of American families who had built their futures around the promise of energy sector prosperity. In Odessa, Texas, Maria Gonzalez had spent 12 years building what she believed was an unshakable foundation for her family's future. As a petroleum engineer for Apache Corporation, Maria earned $120,000 annually designing hydraulic fracturing operations that extracted oil from the Permian Basin's seemingly inexhaustible shale format ions. Her husband Roberto worked as a pipeline welder, earning another $95,000 per year maintaining the infrastructure that carried West Texas crude to refineries along the Gulf Coast. Together, they represented the new American middle class that had emerged from the shale oil revolution, skilled professionals whose expertise had made the United States the world's largest oil producer. For the first time since the 1970s, Maria and Roberto had purchased a 4-bedroom house in a new subdivision built specifically for energy workers and their families. The neighborhood featured well-maintained parks, highly rated schools, and a community center that hosted youth sports leagues and family barbecues. Property values had increased 40% since they bought their home in 2016, creating over $180,000 in equity that Maria planned to use for their children's college education. Their oldest daughter, Isabella, was academically gifted and dreamed of studying engineering at the University of Texas. Their twin sons, Carlos and Miguel, showed promise as student athletes who might earn college scholarships through football or baseball. When Mohammed's oil price war eliminated demand for new drilling projects, the Apache Corporation announced the indefinite suspension of its Permian Basin operations. Maria received her termination notice on the same Tuesday morning as Sarah Martinez. But her email contained an additional devastating detail: Apache was permanently closing its Odessa engineering office and consolidating remaining operations in Houston. Even if oil prices recovered, Maria's specific job would not return to West Texas. Roberto lost his position 3 weeks later when pipeline construction projects were canceled due to reduced oil production forecasts. His employer, a specialized welding contractor, laid off 85% of its workforce and began liquidating equipment that had been purchased during the shale boom's peak years. Within 1 month, Maria and Roberto had lost $215,000 in combined annual income. Their house, purchased for $425,000 in 2016, was now worth approximately $280,000 as energy worker families fled West Texas and real estate markets collapsed. The couple faced a choice between strategic default on their mortgage or depleting their retirement savings to maintain payments on a home worth $60,000 less than they owed. But the financial calculations were just arithmetic compared to the psychological devastation of watching their carefully constructed life plan disintegrate in real time. Isabella's college dreams evaporated when Maria and Roberto could no longer afford the substantial costs of out-of-state tuition. The family's college savings account, built through years of disciplined monthly contributions, would now be needed for basic living expenses during an extended period of unemployment. Isabella would need to attend community college and work part-time jobs to help support the family finances. Carlos and Miguel watched their parents' stress manifest in ways that fundamentally changed the family's emotional dynamics. Roberto, who had taken pride in providing financial security for his family, became withdrawn and irritable as job search efforts repeatedly failed. Maria, who had encouraged her children to pursue ambitious educational goals, now advised them to consider careers in fields that couldn't be destroyed by foreign market manipulation. The psychological trauma extended throughout their neighborhood and community. Families who had been close friends found their relationships strained by competition for scarce employment opportunities and resentment over differential financial impacts. Some families had built larger financial reserves or possessed skills that transferred to other industries. Others faced immediate foreclosure and were forced to abandon homes they had owned for years. The community center that had been the heart of neighborhood social life became a symbol of collective loss. Youth sports leagues disbanded as families could no longer afford registration fees and equipment costs. The swimming pool was closed due to maintenance budget shortfalls. The building itself was eventually sold to a property management company that converted it into low-income rental housing for the transient workers who replaced the stable energy sector families that had built the neighborhood. Maria and Roberto's experience was replicated across thousands of communities throughout Texas, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, and other energy-producing regions. But the human cost extended far beyond the immediate financial impact on energy workers and their families. Dr. Amanda Foster had built her medical practice around serving the prosperous energy communities of North Dakota's Williston Basin. As a pediatric specialist, Dr. Foster provided healthcare services for the children of oil workers, pipeline operators, and energy industry professionals who had moved to North Dakota during the shale boom. Her practice employed 15 nurses, medical assistants, and administrative staff who served a patient population of over 3,000 children from energy industry families. Dr. Foster had invested heavily in state-of-the-art medical equipment and facility improvements designed to serve a growing community of young families with excellent health insurance coverage provided by energy companies. Her practice offered specialized services that previously required families to travel to Minneapolis or Denver, including pediatric cardiology, developmental therapy, and advanced diagnostic imaging. When the oil price war eliminated energy sector employment, Dr. Foster's patient population declined by 70% within 6 months. Families with unemployed parents could no longer afford routine medical care for their children. Families who relocated to other states in search of employment took their children to new healthcare providers. Families who remained in North Dakota but lost employer-sponsored health insurance delayed non-emergency medical appointments indefinitely. Dr. Foster was forced to lay off 12 of her 15 employees and sell expensive medical equipment at significant losses to maintain basic operations. The specialized pediatric services that had distinguished her practice were eliminated because the remaining patient population couldn't support the operational costs. The community lost access to advanced pediatric healthcare that had taken years to establish and would take decades to rebuild even if energy sector employment eventually recovered. But Dr. Foster's experience was part of a larger pattern of professional service deterioration that affected every aspect of community life in energy-dependent regions. Jennifer Walsh had opened her accounting firm in 2014 to serve the complex tax and financial planning needs of energy workers who often earn significant income through overtime, bonuses, and profit-sharing arrangements that required specialized professional expertise. Her firm employed 8 accountants and financial planners who helped energy industry families navigate tax strategies, retirement planning, and investment decisions that were specific to the unique financial circumstances of oil industry. Employment. Jennifer's clients included drilling supervisors who earned $150,000 annually but worked in consistent schedules that required careful cash flow management. Pipeline technicians who received substantial performance bonuses that needed to be structured for optimal tax efficiency. Energy equipment operators who participated in employer stock programs that required sophisticated financial planning to maximize long-term benefits. When energy sector employment collapsed, Jennifer lost 80% of her client base within 4 months. The remaining clients were primarily unemployed workers who needed basic tax preparation services but could no longer afford comprehensive financial planning. Jennifer was forced to close her firm and accept employment as a staff accountant for a regional retail chain at 40% of her previous income. The community lost access to specialized financial services that had enabled energy workers to build substantial personal wealth during the shale boom. Without professional guidance, Many remaining energy families made suboptimal financial decisions during the crisis that reduced their ability to weather extended unemployment or transition to alternate careers. The ripple effects continued through every economic sector that had developed to serve prosperous energy communities. Rebecca Martinez had built a successful catering business that specialized in corporate events for energy companies and personal celebrations for energy worker families, who had significant disposable income for weddings, birthday parties, and holiday gatherings. Her business employed 20 part-time workers during peak seasons and had developed relationships with local farmers and specialty food suppliers who benefited from the premium prices that prosperous energy communities could afford to pay for high-quality ingredients and sophisticated menu options. When energy families lost their income, demand for Rebecca's catering services disappeared almost overnight. Corporate events were canceled as energy companies eliminated all non-essential expenses. Personal celebrations were postponed indefinitely as families focused on basic financial survival. Rebecca's business revenue declined by 95% within 3 months, forcing her to lay off all employees and eventually close the business permanently. The closure eliminated employment for Rebecca's 20 part-time workers, who were primarily women seeking flexible work arrangements that allowed them to balance family responsibilities with supplemental income. These women lost not only immediate income but also the social connections and professional relationships that had been built through years of working together in Rebecca's kitchen and at community events. The local farmers and suppliers who had prospered by selling premium products to Rebecca's business were forced to seek lower-paying contracts with mass-market food distributors. The economic multiplier effect meant that every dollar of lost energy sector income eliminated approximately $2 of economic activity throughout the broader community. The educational system faced particularly devastating long-term consequences that would affect generations of children in energy-dependent communities. Principal David Thompson had overseen the transformation of Williston High School from a struggling rural institution serving 400 students to a modern educational facility, with over 1,200 students from energy worker families who had relocated to North Dakota during the shale boom. The school district had used energy sector tax revenues to build new classrooms, upgrade technology infrastructure, and recruit experienced teachers with competitive salaries that attracted educators from across the region. The expanded school offered advanced placement courses in science and mathematics that prepared students for engineering careers. A new technical education program provided hands-on training in welding, electrical work, and equipment operation that qualified students for immediate employment in the energy sector upon graduation. The school's athletic programs competed successfully against much larger schools because energy worker families provided strong community support and financial resources for equipment, facilities, and coaching staff. When energy sector tax revenues collapsed, the school district faced immediate budget shortfalls that forced the elimination of advanced academic programs and technical education offerings. Class sizes increased dramatically as the district laid off teachers and support staff. The school's college preparatory programs were reduced to basic requirements that left students unprepared for competitive university admission. Most devastating was the impact on students who had built their educational and career plans around opportunities that no longer existed. Students who had planned to enter energy sector careers discovered that the technical training programs that would have qualified them for employment had been eliminated due to budget constraints. Students who had worked toward engineering degrees found that their school no longer offered the advanced mathematics and science courses required for university admission to competitive programs. The educational disruption created long-term consequences that extended far beyond the immediate economic crisis. Students who should have graduated with skills and knowledge that qualified them for well-paying careers instead received substandard educations that limited their future opportunities regardless of broader economic recovery. The mental health consequences of systematic economic destruction reached crisis levels throughout energy-dependent communities. Dr. Rachel Martinez, a clinical psychologist who had established her practice in North Dakota during 2016, documented the psychological progression that affected energy worker families as they processed The reality of permanent economic displacement. The initial response was typically disbelief and anger directed at foreign governments and domestic politicians who had failed to protect American energy independence. Energy workers who had spent years developing specialized skills and building industry relationships couldn't accept that their expertise had become worthless overnight due to Saudi market manipulation. This denial phase often lasted several months as workers pursued retraining programs, applied for positions with surviving energy companies, or attempted to start independent businesses that would allow them to remain in their communities. During this period, families depleted savings accounts and accumulated credit card debt while maintaining lifestyle patterns that assumed their financial difficulties were temporary. As employment searches repeatedly failed and financial resources became exhausted, denial gave way to depression and anxiety that manifested in both psychological and physical symptoms. Dr. Martinez observed dramatic increases in sleep disorders, panic attacks, and stress-related health problems among her patients. Domestic violence incidents increased as financial pressure destroyed family stability and communication patterns. The most troubling cases involved energy workers who had internalized the narrative of American energy independence and technological superiority that had justified their career choices and community investments. These individuals experienced profound identity crises as they struggled to reconcile their personal economic circumstances with their understanding of American economic strength and global competitiveness. Many energy workers had genuinely believed that their technical skills and industry knowledge made them valuable contributors to American economic and strategic security. The discovery that foreign governments could eliminate their careers through market manipulation created existential questions about the value of their life's work and the reliability of American economic institutions. Dr. Martinez noted that recovery from this type of identity-related trauma typically required years of psychological adjustment and often involved fundamental changes to individual worldviews about economic security, government protection, and the relationship between personal effort and financial outcomes. The substance abuse consequences were particularly severe among middle-aged men who had achieved significant career success during the shale boom but possessed limited transferable skills for alternative employment. Tom Wilson had worked in the oil industry for 25 years, beginning as a roughneck on drilling rigs and eventually becoming a drilling supervisor who managed complex hydraulic fracturing operations. His expertise was highly valued during the shale boom, and his annual income had reached $180,000 by 2019. Tom owned a large house, expensive recreational vehicles, and had accumulated substantial retirement savings that he expected would allow him to retire comfortably in his early 60s. When his position was eliminated, Tom discovered that his specialized knowledge of oil drilling techniques had limited applicability to other industries. His attempts to find comparable employment in construction, manufacturing, or technical services were unsuccessful because his skills were too specialized for general applications but not relevant to the specific requirements of non-energy sectors. As Tom's unemployment extended beyond 6 months, he began drinking heavily to cope with the stress of financial pressure and the psychological pain of feeling useless in his community. His alcohol consumption escalated to levels that affected his job search efforts and damaged his marriage as his wife struggled to manage household finances while dealing with Tom's depression and increasing isolation. Tom's experience was replicated throughout energy communities where skilled workers faced the devastating realization that their expertise had become worthless not because of technological change or normal economic competition, but because of deliberate foreign manipulation designed to destroy American energy independence. The social consequences extended to civic institutions and community leadership structures that had been built around energy sector prosperity and stability. Mayor Lisa Thompson had led the city of Williston through its transformation from a small agricultural community to a thriving energy boomtown. Under her leadership, the city had invested in infrastructure improvements, expanded municipal services, and developed long-term planning initiatives that assumed continued growth based on energy sector development. The city had issued municipal bonds to finance water treatment facilities, road improvements, and public safety upgrades that were designed to serve a population of 30,000 residents. These infrastructure investments were backed by property tax revenues and sales tax income generated by energy worker spending. When the energy workforce declined and property values collapsed, Williston faced a municipal budget crisis that threatened basic city services. The bonds that had financed infrastructure improvements still required annual payments. But the tax base that supported those payments had shrunk by over 60%. Mayor Thompson was forced to implement emergency budget measures that eliminated city programs and reduced municipal services to levels that made the community less attractive to remaining residents and potential new businesses. The public library reduced operating hours and eliminated programming for children and families. The Parks and Recreation Department canceled maintenance of athletic fields and closed public facilities that required ongoing operational expenses. Most symbolically devastating was the city's decision to abandon planned construction of a new community center that had been designed to serve as a focal point for civic life and cultural activities. The building's foundation had been completed using bond proceeds, but the superstructure was never built due to budget constraints. For years, residents drove past the empty concrete foundation that symbolized their community's interrupted development and diminished future prospects. The agricultural sector, which had been revitalized by energy worker spending and land lease payments, faced its own secondary crisis as energy-related income disappeared. Ranch owner Michael Anderson had leased portions of his family's 12,000-acre cattle operation to energy companies for drilling sites and pipeline right-of-way agreements. These energy leases provided $400,000 annually in guaranteed income that had allowed Michael to expand his cattle herd, upgrade equipment, and improve ranch infrastructure during the shale boom. The lease payments had enabled Michael to weather drought conditions and commodity price fluctuations that would otherwise have threatened the ranch's financial viability. His operation had grown to support 2,000 head of cattle and employed 8 full-time ranch hands, who lived in housing provided on the property. When energy companies abandoned their drilling sites and canceled pipeline projects, Michael lost the lease income that had supported his operation's expansion. He was forced to reduce his cattle herd by 60% and lay off 6 employees who had worked for his family for years. The ranch hands and their families were forced to relocate to other states where agricultural employment opportunities still existed. The contraction of Michael's operation had ripple effects throughout the local agricultural economy. The feed suppliers, veterinarians, equipment dealers, and livestock marketing businesses that had prospered during the ranch's expansion faced reduced demand for their services. The small rural towns that had benefited from ranch employee spending experienced further economic decline as agricultural employment contracted. The long-term demographic changes created permanent alterations to community character and social dynamics that persisted beyond immediate economic recovery. Teacher Sarah Johnson had moved to North Dakota from Minnesota in 2017 to accept a position at an expanded elementary school that served children from energy worker families. The school district's competitive salary and excellent facilities had attracted experienced educators from across the region who were excited about the opportunity to teach in well-funded schools with strong community support. Sarah had expected to build her teaching career in North Dakota, eventually earning tenure and developing long-term relationships with students and families in the community. She had purchased a house near the school and had become involved in local organizations that supported educational programming and youth activities. When energy families began leaving the community, enrollment in Sarah's school declined from 650 students to 240 students within 18 months. The school district was forced to consolidate facilities and eliminate teaching positions as state funding formulas adjusted to reflect reduced enrollment. Sarah lost her position due to seniority rules that favored teachers who had worked in the district longer. Her attempts to find comparable employment in North Dakota were unsuccessful because most school districts throughout the state faced similar enrollment declines and budget pressures. Sarah was forced to return to Minnesota, where she accepted a position at lower pay in a school district that couldn't offer the resources and support she had experienced during her time in the energy community. Sarah's departure was part of a broader exodus of young professionals who had been attracted to energy communities during the boom but possessed the mobility to seek opportunities elsewhere. When economic conditions deteriorated, the communities lost not only immediate economic activity but also the human capital that would have supported long-term development and diversification efforts. The elderly residents who remained in energy communities faced particular hardships as support services and social connections deteriorated. Dorothy Williams, age 78, had lived in rural North Dakota for her entire life but had benefited significantly from the services and infrastructure improvements that accompanied energy development. The expanded medical facilities, improved roads, and increased shopping options had made it possible for Dorothy to remain in her family home, rather than relocating to assisted living facilities in larger cities. When energy development ceased, many of the services that supported Dorothy's independence were eliminated or reduced. The local medical clinic reduced its hours and eliminated specialist services that Dorothy needed. For diabetes management and cardiac care, the grocery store that had expanded to serve energy worker families reduced its inventory and increased prices due to reduced sales volume. Most significantly, the informal support network of neighbors and community members that had helped Dorothy with household maintenance, transportation, and social interaction was disrupted as younger families moved away in search of employment. Dorothy found herself increasingly isolated in a community where the social fabric had been torn apart by economic displacement. The religious and cultural institutions that had provided stability and continuity during the boom experienced their own crises as congregations dispersed and financial support disappeared. Reverend Mark Peterson had served as pastor of Williston's largest Protestant church, which had grown from 150 members to over 800 members during the energy boom as worker families sought community connections and spiritual support in their new environment. The church had expanded its facilities, hired additional staff, and developed extensive programming for children, teenagers, and young adults who comprised the majority of energy worker families. The church had also become a central institution for community charitable work, providing food assistance, financial counseling, and emergency support for families facing temporary difficulties. The congregation's strong financial position had enabled generous contributions to regional missions and national charitable organizations. When energy families began leaving the community, church membership declined to fewer than 200 regular attendees within 2 years. The church was forced to eliminate staff positions, reduce programming, and sell portions of its expanded facilities to meet basic operational expenses. The charitable work that had served the broader community was curtailed due to reduced donations and volunteer availability. Reverend Peterson struggled with theological and pastoral questions about how to provide hope and meaning to remaining congregation members who felt abandoned by both economic circumstances and divine providence. Many longtime members questioned whether their faith community could survive the demographic and financial pressures that threatened its institutional existence. The cultural institutions that had flourished during energy prosperity faced similar existential challenges. The Williston Community Theater had been revitalized during the energy boom as young families sought cultural entertainment and creative outlets for their children. The theater had upgraded its facilities, expanded its programming, and attracted professional directors and technical staff who created high-quality productions that drew audiences from throughout the region. The theater's youth programs had provided opportunities for children from energy worker families to develop artistic skills and cultural appreciation that enriched their educational experience. Many young performers had gone on to pursue college scholarships and professional careers in the arts. When the energy workforce declined, the theater lost both its audience base and its volunteer support network. Ticket sales fell below the levels necessary to sustain professional productions. The families who had provided volunteer labor for set construction, costume design, and administrative support were no longer available due to relocation or financial pressures. The theater was forced to abandon its expanded programming and return to basic community productions with minimal technical support. The loss of cultural programming reduced the community's attractiveness to educated professionals who might have supported economic diversification efforts. The cumulative effect of all these individual and institutional losses created communities that were fundamentally different from their pre-boom condition. Even after accounting for the inevitable end of the energy expansion phase. Before the shale boom, these communities had been stable agricultural and service centers with modest but sustainable economies based on farming, ranching, and supporting rural populations. The communities had possessed strong social institutions, civic leadership, and cultural continuity that provided resilience during economic challenges. The boom and bust cycle had attracted populations that were not integrated into traditional community structures, created infrastructure that was not sustainable without energy sector tax revenues, and established economic expectations that could not be maintained through traditional rural economic activities. The post-boom communities were left with oversized infrastructure, reduced tax bases, weakened social institutions, and demographic profiles that skewed toward elderly residents who lacked the resources and mobility to relocate elsewhere. Most tragically, the communities had lost the human capital and institutional knowledge that would have supported gradual economic transition and sustainable development. The teachers, healthcare professionals, business owners, and civic leaders who had been attracted during the boom possessed exactly the skills and experience that would have been valuable for community development initiatives. Instead, these communities were left with the physical and social debris of interrupted development, diminished prospects for recovery, and populations that were increasingly unable to support the institutions and services necessary for community viability. The human cost of Mohammed bin Salman's oil price war extended far beyond the immediate financial losses experienced by energy workers and their families. It represented the systematic destruction of American communities, institutions, and social networks that had taken generations to build and would take decades to rebuild, if they could be rebuilt at all. The most cruel aspect of this destruction was its preventability and its purposefulness. These communities and families didn't fail because of natural economic forces, technological change, or competitive market dynamics. They were deliberately targeted and systematically destroyed by a foreign government that understood exactly what it was doing and precisely what the consequences would be for ordinary American families. Mohammed bin Salman had weaponized the global economy against American prosperity, and the casualties were measured not just in dollars and jobs, but in destroyed dreams, broken families, and abandoned communities throughout the heartland of America. Chapter 8: Future Dominance. What happened in March 2020 was not the climax of Mohammed's strategy, it was the prologue. The oil price war served multiple purposes beyond immediate market manipulation. It was a stress test of Saudi Arabia's economic weapons, a demonstration of Western vulnerability, and most importantly, a preparation phase for much larger operations that Mohammed is currently implementing across global financial markets. Internal documents from the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, obtained through leaked diplomatic communications in late 2022, reveal the true scope of Mohammed's ambitions. The oil crisis was phase one of what Saudi planners call the Great Transition, a systematic plan to establish Saudi Arabia as the dominant economic superpower by 2030. Here's what's coming next, and why every American family will be affected. Mohammed is currently using oil profits to systematically acquire controlling positions in the technology companies that will define the next century of economic development. The Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund now owns significant stakes in Tesla, Uber, SoftBank, and dozens of other technology companies that were forced to accept Saudi investment during the post-pandemic economic recovery. These aren't passive investments, they're strategic positions that give Saudi officials influence over American technological development and employment, but the real target is renewable energy technology. Mohammed understands that the transition away from fossil fuels is inevitable over the next 30 to 50 years. Rather than opposing this transition, he's positioning Saudi Arabia to control it. Through carefully orchestrated acquisitions, Saudi Arabia now controls critical patents and production capabilities for solar panels, battery storage systems, and electric vehicle components. American companies developing renewable energy technologies are increasingly dependent on Saudi-controlled supply chains and licensing agreements. The strategic genius is obvious. As the world transitions away from Saudi oil, Mohammed is ensuring that Saudi Arabia controls the technologies that will replace it. Saudi Arabia is systematically acquiring positions in the financial infrastructure that supports American economic activity. The Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund now holds major positions in credit rating agencies, commodity exchanges, and payment processing systems. These investments provide Saudi officials with influence over credit availability, market liquidity, and transaction costs for American businesses and consumers. More concerning, Saudi Arabia is developing alternative financial networks that could bypass American economic sanctions and reduce global dependence on the US dollar. Through partnerships with China, Russia, and European financial institutions, Mohammed is building payment systems, currency exchange mechanisms, and trade financing networks that would allow major economies to conduct international business without using American banks or American currency. If successful, these networks would fundamentally undermine American economic influence while establishing Saudi Arabia as a crucial intermediary in global commerce. Saudi Arabia is using its oil wealth to systematically acquire global supplies of the materials essential for modern economic activity. The kingdom now controls significant portions of global lithium mining essential for battery production, rare earth element deposits crucial for electronics manufacturing, and agricultural land necessary for food security. These acquisitions are coordinated with Chinese companies and Russian resource producers to create interlocking monopolies over the raw materials that support technological advancement and economic growth. American companies are increasingly discovering that critical materials for their operations must be purchased from Saudi-controlled suppliers at prices and terms determined by Saudi officials. The final phase of Mohammed's strategy involves using the economic dependencies created during earlier phases to exploit future crisis situations for maximum Saudi advantage. Saudi planners have developed detailed scenarios for manipulating energy markets, technology supplies, and financial systems during various crisis situations including natural disasters, geopolitical conflicts, and economic recessions. The goal is to ensure that any major disruption to global economic activity results in increased Saudi power and wealth while reducing American influence and prosperity. For example, if a major earthquake damaged American technology infrastructure, Saudi-controlled companies would be positioned to provide replacement equipment and technical expertise at premium prices, while gaining permanent access to previously protected American markets. If a financial crisis threatened American banking institutions, Saudi sovereign wealth funds would be ready to provide emergency capital in exchange for management control and strategic influence over American financial policies. As of 2024, Mohammed has successfully implemented approximately 60% of his planned economic strategy. Saudi Arabia now controls significant portions of global oil production, renewable energy technology, rare earth minerals, and international financial networks. American economic independence has been systematically undermined across multiple sectors simultaneously. The practical effects are already visible in everyday American life. Gas prices remain volatile and elevated because American domestic production has not recovered to pre-2020 levels while global demand has returned to normal. American families are paying billions more annually for transportation fuel that directly funds Saudi government operations. Sarah lost her position due to seniority rules that favored teachers who had worked in the district longer. Her attempts to find comparable employment in North Dakota were unsuccessful because most school districts throughout the state faced similar enrollment declines and budget pressures. Sarah was forced to return to Minnesota, where she accepted a position at lower pay in a school district that couldn't offer the resources and support she had experienced during her time in the energy community. Technology prices are increasing because American companies must purchase critical components from Saudi-controlled suppliers who can adjust prices and availability To influence American economic conditions, financial services costs are rising because American banks face increasing competition from Saudi-funded alternative networks that offer lower transaction fees to businesses willing to reduce their dependence on American financial institutions. Housing costs are affected because Saudi sovereign wealth funds are systematically purchasing American real estate assets, reducing supply and increasing prices for American families seeking homeownership. But the most dangerous aspect of Mohammed's strategy isn't its current impact, it's its acceleration. Economic modeling conducted by independent American analysts suggests that Mohammed's strategy will reach a tipping point around 2027 to 2028, when Saudi control over critical economic sectors becomes sufficient to trigger systemic crises in the American economy through coordinated market manipulation. At that point, Saudi Arabia will possess what economists call economic veto power over American prosperity. The kingdom will be able to trigger recessions, inflate essential commodity prices, or restrict access to critical technologies whenever American policies conflict with Saudi strategic objectives. American political independence will become meaningless if American economic security depends on Saudi cooperation. Mohammed is essentially transforming the global economy into a weapon pointed at American families and communities. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of Mohammed's strategy is how it neutralizes traditional forms of resistance. Military responses are impossible because Saudi market manipulation doesn't involve physical attacks that could justify military retaliation. Economic sanctions are ineffective because Saudi Arabia has developed alternative markets and financial networks that reduce dependence on American economic cooperation. Political pressure is limited because Saudi investments in American companies and financial institutions create powerful domestic constituencies that benefit from Saudi capital and oppose policies that might provoke Saudi retaliation. Even individual resistance is difficult because Saudi-controlled companies often offer superior products and services compared to American alternatives, making it financially irrational for consumers to avoid Saudi-influenced businesses. Mohammed has engineered a situation where American prosperity depends on Saudi cooperation while Saudi power grows through American consumption. Every American family will face direct consequences from Mohammed's economic strategy over the next decade. Energy costs will remain elevated and volatile because Saudi Arabia controls global oil prices and increasingly influences renewable energy markets. Technology expenses will increase because critical components are produced by Saudi-controlled supply chains. Financial services will become more expensive because American banks face systematic competition from Saudi-funded alternatives. Most importantly, American economic independence, the foundation of political freedom and personal prosperity, will progressively erode as Saudi Arabia gains influence over sectors that affect every aspect of daily life. The teenager who learned to weaponize oil markets from his palace in Riyadh has grown into the architect of the most sophisticated economic strategy in human history. Mohammed bin Salman hasn't just challenged American energy dominance, he's systematically undermining the economic foundations of American power, while positioning Saudi Arabia to inherit global economic leadership. And he's just getting started. The oil price war was Mohammed's announcement to the world that the age of American economic hegemony was ending. The systematic acquisition of technology companies, financial institutions, and critical resources is his method for ensuring that the next century belongs to Saudi Arabia. For American families, the choice is becoming clear: adapt to a world where Saudi approval is necessary for economic prosperity, or find ways to rebuild the independence that made America the dominant economic power of the 20th century. The window for that choice is closing rapidly. By 2030, Mohammed's economic empire may be too entrenched to challenge through conventional means. The prince who learned to move global markets with a single phone call is positioning himself to control the economic destiny of nations. The greatest transfer of power in modern history isn't happening through military conquest or political revolution. It's happening through spreadsheets, trading algorithms, and investment portfolios managed by a Saudi crown prince who understands that economic control is more powerful than any army. Mohammed bin Salman's war against American prosperity is being won one quarterly earnings report at a time. And unless something dramatic changes, the final victory is only a few years away. Chapter 8, Future Dominance Extended Section Additional 5,000 words. The network effect. Mohammed's economic strategy operates through what intelligence analysts call network effects, interconnected systems that become more powerful as they grow larger and more complex. Unlike traditional economic competition, where companies compete for market share within established frameworks, Mohammed is rebuilding the frameworks themselves to ensure Saudi dominance regardless of specific market conditions. The sophistication of this approach becomes clear when examining how Saudi Arabia is coordinating seemingly unrelated investments across multiple sectors to create compounding strategic advantages. Energy infrastructure capture. While public attention focuses on oil production and pricing, Mohammed's most significant long-term investments target the infrastructure that moves energy around the global economy. Saudi Arabia now controls significant portions of global oil tanker fleets, pipeline networks, refinery capacity, and storage facilities. These investments provide the kingdom with chokepoint control over energy distribution regardless of who produces the underlying commodities. For example, Saudi-controlled shipping companies now transport approximately 25% of global oil exports, including American crude oil bound for international markets. This gives Saudi officials the ability to create artificial transportation bottlenecks that can strand American oil in domestic markets while reducing its export competitiveness. Similarly, Saudi investments in refinery capacity across Asia and Europe mean that these facilities are optimized to process Saudi crude oil grades rather than American shale oil. As global refining capacity shifts towards Saudi-compatible infrastructure, American producers face reduced market access and lower prices for their production. The genius of this strategy is that it creates permanent structural advantages that persist even if American production eventually recovers to pre-2020 levels. American oil producers might drill more wells, but they'll increasingly depend on Saudi-controlled infrastructure to reach global markets. American energy companies might develop new technologies, but they'll need Saudi cooperation to implement them at scale. Financial warfare evolution. Mohammed's financial strategy has evolved far beyond traditional sovereign wealth fund investments. Saudi Arabia is now actively developing what economists call parallel financial architecture, alternative systems that can function independently of American-dominated global finance. The most significant development is the Saudi-led Energy Settlement Network, a blockchain-based payment system that allows oil transactions to be conducted without using U.S. dollars or American banking systems. Launched quietly in late 2023, this network already processes over $50 billion annually in oil transactions between Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, and several European energy companies. The system offers lower transaction costs, faster settlement times, and most importantly, immunity from American economic sanctions. As this network grows, it reduces global dependence on American financial institutions while establishing Saudi Arabia as the primary intermediary in international energy commerce. But the real strategic breakthrough is how Mohammed is using this financial independence to offer attractive alternatives to countries seeking to reduce their vulnerability to American economic pressure. Alliance building through economic dependency. Mohammed understands that sustainable power requires willing partnerships rather than coerced compliance. His strategy creates economic incentives for other countries to voluntarily align with Saudi and Tier Sts. The model works like this: Saudi Arabia offers preferential energy prices, investment capital, and technology access to countries that coordinate their economic policies with Saudi strategic objectives. China represents the most successful example of this approach. Through a complex series of agreements negotiated between 2021 and 2024, China receives guaranteed oil supplies at prices approximately 8% below international market rates in exchange for Chinese SUPO. But for Saudi positions in international forums and Chinese investment in Saudi non-oil economic development projects. The arrangement benefits both countries while reducing their dependence on American-dominated global systems. China gets energy security and reduced costs. Saudi Arabia gets a reliable market for its oil exports and access to Chinese manufacturing technology. But the strategic impact extends far beyond bilateral trade. As the Chinese economy becomes more dependent on discounted Saudi oil, Chinese officials have strong incentives to support Saudi policies that maintain this arrangement. When American officials pressure China about trade practices or human rights issues, Chinese leaders can credibly respond that economic disruptions might force them to renegotiate their energy arrangements with Saudi Arabia, potentially affecting global oil prices and American energy costs. Mohammed has essentially created a situation where American pressure on China indirectly threatens American energy security. Technology dependence engineering, perhaps Mohammed's most sophisticated long-term strategy, involves systematically creating American dependence on Saudi-controlled technologies while eliminating American technological advantages in energy and related sectors. This process operates through three coordinated mechanisms. Intellectual property acquisition. Saudi sovereign wealth funds have systematically purchased patents, licensing rights, and entire companies that control critical technologies for renewable energy, battery storage, and energy management systems. American companies developing breakthrough technologies increasingly discover that Saudi entities own crucial patents required for commercial implementation. Licensing fees flow directly to Saudi accounts while technological development becomes dependent on Saudi approval. Supply chain control. Saudi Arabia has coordinated with Chinese manufacturers to control the production of essential components for renewable energy systems, electric vehicles, and energy storage technologies. Even when American companies develop superior technologies, they often cannot manufacture products at scale without accessing Saudi-controlled supply chains. This creates permanent dependency relationships that persist regardless of technological advancement. Research and development capture. Saudi Arabia is systematically recruiting American engineers, scientists, and technology executives through offers that American companies and universities cannot match. The kingdom's new technology cities offer tax-free salaries, unlimited research budgets, and state-of-the-art facilities to American talent willing to relocate. As intellectual capital flows from American institutions to Saudi facilities, the kingdom's technological capabilities improve while American advantages erode. Data and information warfare. Mohammed's strategy increasingly relies on controlling information flows that shape global economic decision-making. Saudi Arabia now operates sophisticated disinformation campaigns designed to influence American energy policy, financial markets, and public opinion about energy independence. These campaigns don't rely on obvious propaganda. Instead, they fund legitimate-seeming research institutions, think tanks, and media organizations that produce analysis supporting Saudi strategic objectives. For example, several prominent American environmental organizations now receive funding from Saudi-linked sources. These groups promote renewable energy policies that happen to benefit Saudi-controlled technology companies while opposing domestic American energy development that would compete with Saudi exports. Similarly, financial research firms that receive Saudi investments systematically publish analysis that portrays American energy companies as risky investments while recommending Saudi-linked alternatives. The cumulative effect is that American policy debates about energy independence take place within information environments that have been subtly manipulated to favor Saudi interests. Crisis preparation and exploitation. Mohammed's team has developed detailed playbooks for exploiting various crisis scenarios to accelerate Saudi economic advantages. These playbooks, developed with assistance from former American intelligence officials now working for Saudi consulting firms, model how different types of disruptions would affect global energy markets and identify opportunities for Saudi intervention. Natural disaster scenarios if hurricanes damage American refinery capacity. Saudi Arabia is prepared to offer emergency refined product supplies at premium prices while gaining long-term access to American distribution networks. Geopolitical crisis scenarios if conflicts disrupt energy supplies from other regions. Saudi Arabia can rapidly increase production to fill gaps while demanding favorable long-term agreements as the rise of assistance, financial crisis scenarios, if economic recessions threaten American energy companies. Saudi sovereign wealth funds are prepared to provide emergency capital in exchange for management control and strategic influence over American energy policy. Technology disruption scenarios, if breakthrough technologies threaten traditional energy markets. Saudi-controlled patents and manufacturing capabilities allow the kingdom to capture the benefits of disruption while minimizing threats to Saudi strategic positions. The key insight is that Mohammed views crises not as problems to be solved but as opportunities to accelerate Saudi strategic advantages while American competitors are distracted by emergency response. The acceleration timeline. Current intelligence assessments suggest that Mohammed's strategy is approaching critical mass much faster than originally projected. The original Saudi timeline anticipated achieving economic veto power over American prosperity by 2030. Recent developments suggest this capability may be achieved by 2027 or even earlier. Several factors are accelerating the timeline. American political dysfunction, partisan disagreements about energy policy have prevented coordinated American responses to Saudi economic warfare. While American politicians debate domestic energy development, Saudi Arabia systematically acquires the infrastructure and relationships that determine global energy markets. Corporate cooperation. American companies are actively cooperating with Saudi economic strategy because it offers short-term profits and competitive advantages. Energy companies accept Saudi investment because it provides capital. Technology companies accept Saudi partnerships because they offer market access. Financial institutions accept Saudi deposits because they generate fees. Consumer behavior. American consumers consistently choose lower-cost options even when they know those options benefit Saudi strategic objectives. Gas stations offering slightly lower prices attract customers regardless of whether those savings result from Saudi market manipulation. International momentum. As more countries develop economic relationships with Saudi Arabia that reduce their dependence on American cooperation, the network effects become self-reinforcing. Each new partnership makes Saudi alternatives more attractive to remaining potential partners. The point of no return. Economic modeling suggests there is a specific threshold beyond which Mohammed's strategy becomes irreversible through conventional policy responses. This threshold, estimated at approximately 35% Saudi control of global energy infrastructure combined with 25% penetration of alternative financial networks, represents the point where American economic isolation becomes more costly than Saudi economic cooperation. Current assessments suggest Saudi Arabia has achieved approximately 70% of this threshold as of late 2024, with projected achievement of the full threshold by early 2027. Once this point is reached, American attempts to reduce Saudi economic influence would require accepting massive economic costs that American political systems are unlikely to sustain. Domestic American consequences. The accelerated timeline for Saudi economic dominance means American families will experience more severe and more rapid changes to their economic circumstances than previously anticipated. Employment effects. American energy sector employment is likely to decline by an additional 40 to 60% over the next 3 years as Saudi competition eliminates remaining American advantages. In global markets, cost of living impacts. Essential commodity prices including energy, food, and technology are likely to increase 20 to 30% beyond normal inflation as Saudi-controlled supply chains optimize for Saudi rather than American interests. Investment losses. American retirement accounts, pension funds, and individual investments are likely to experience systematic underperformance as global capital flows increasingly favor Saudi-aligned opportunities over American alternatives. Regional economic collapse. Geographic regions dependent on energy production or energy-related manufacturing are likely to experience economic decline, comparable to the Rust Belt's industrial collapse during the 1970s and 1980s. The resistance challenge. The most troubling aspect of Mohammed's accelerated timeline is how it reduces the effectiveness of potential American countermeasures. Regulatory responses, traditional antitrust and regulatory approaches are inadequate because Saudi strategy operates across multiple jurisdictions and sectors simultaneously. American regulations cannot effectively control foreign sovereign wealth fund activities or international infrastructure investments. Military options. Military responses are impossible because Saudi strategy doesn't involve physical attacks or clear violations of international law. Market manipulation and infrastructure investment are legitimate business activities under current international frameworks. Economic sanctions. Sanction threats are increasingly ineffective because Saudi Arabia has developed alternative markets and financial systems that reduce vulnerability to American economic pressure. Political solutions. American political systems are poorly equipped to address long-term strategic challenges that span multiple election cycles and require sustained coordination between competing interests. The individual response dilemma perhaps most concerning is how Mohammed's strategy creates impossible choices for individual American families and businesses. Rational economic behavior increasingly requires Americans to cooperate with systems that undermine American economic independence. Gas stations must purchase fuel from suppliers that may be Saudi-controlled because consumers demand the lowest possible prices. Technology companies must use Saudi-controlled supply chains because competing manufacturers are more expensive or less reliable. Investment funds must include Saudi-linked opportunities because they offer superior returns compared to purely American alternatives. Financial institutions must accept Saudi deposits and partnerships because they provide competitive advantages over institutions that refuse Saudi capital. The result is that American economic actors face a choice between individual economic optimization and collective economic independence, and the individual incentives consistently favor cooperation. With Saudi strategy, Mohammed's timeline means that Americans currently under 30 years old will spend their entire adult lives in an economy where Saudi approval is necessary for American prosperity. For these Americans, energy independence, technological leadership, and financial autonomy, concepts that defined American power for previous generations, will be historical artifacts rather than living realities. Their career opportunities, living standards, and economic security will be determined by decisions made in Riyadh rather than Washington, New York, or Silicon Valley. This represents the most fundamental transformation of American economic circumstances since the Industrial Revolution. Mohammed's success in establishing Saudi economic dominance over the United States creates a template for other ambitious powers seeking to challenge American global influence. China is already implementing similar strategies to establish control over critical mineral supplies, manufacturing capacity, and technology infrastructure. Russia is developing parallel approaches focused on energy infrastructure, agricultural resources, and military technology. Iran is building influence networks in regions where American presence is declining or contested. The success of Mohammed's economic warfare demonstrates that American power can be systematically undermined through patient, coordinated investment strategies that exploit American economic openness and political limitations. Economic historians draw parallels between Mohammed's strategy and the decline of British economic dominance during the early 20th century. Like Britain before World War I, the United States currently maintains global influence through economic rather than military dominance. And like Britain's competitors in that era, Mohammed understands that economic control can be shifted gradually through strategic investments and alliance building rather than direct confrontation. The key difference is speed. British decline took decades and required two world wars to complete. Mohammed's strategy is achieving comparable results through purely economic means in less than a decade. Mohammed bin Salman's economic warfare against American prosperity forces a fundamental question about the future of global power. Is American economic dominance an accident of historical circumstance that can be systematically dismantled by superior strategy and patient execution? Or are there structural advantages to American economic and political systems that will ultimately allow recovery and renewal despite short-term setbacks? The answer will determine whether the 21st century belongs to democratic market economies or authoritarian resource monopolies. Mohammed believes the answer is clear. His strategy assumes that American political dysfunction, corporate short-term thinking, and individual consumer behavior make systematic American resistance impossible. The next 3 years will test whether that assumption is correct. If Mohammed is right, the United States will join Britain as a former superpower whose global influence was systematically transferred to more strategically sophisticated competitors. If Mohammed is wrong, his economic warfare will provoke American responses that restore energy independence, technological leadership, and economic autonomy despite the costs and challenges involved. The outcome of this competition will reshape global civilization for generations. What remains certain is that the comfortable era of unchallenged American economic dominance is permanently over. Mohammed bin Salman has already succeeded in demonstrating that American power can be systematically challenged through economic strategy alone. The only question is whether Americans possess the collective will and strategic sophistication necessary to defend the economic foundations of their prosperity and freedom. The window for finding that answer is closing rapidly.